mark of the end of the world, but it's feeling just like every other morning before. Now I wonder what my life is gonna mean if it's gone. The cars are moving like a half a mile an hour, and I started staring at the passengers waving goodbye. Can you tell me what was ever really special about me all this time? But I believe the world is burning to the ground. Oh well, I guess we're gonna find out. Let's see how far we've come. Let's see how far we've come. Well, I believe it all is coming to an end. Oh well.
His book is at the back of the room, so if you just bring it up here, I want to show it. That way people will see it. I think it might be useful.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, I didn't realize that we had audio here. And Matthew Stein, hello, that's very nice to meet you.
Hi, it's a pleasure meeting you two.
Okay, I'm Carrie Cassidy, and this is Bill Ryan from Project Camelot.
And this is the next best thing to a hologram. We've got a holographic Matthew Stein and a holographic book, almost. A bit flat, but...
It's a bit flat. But it's very thick. It's good for weightlifting exercises, especially if you get a case of them. They're quite heavy by a case of 10.
Very good. It reminds me of an updated version of the Whole Earth catalogue, and that tells you a little bit about my generation, I guess.
Well, sort of. See, the Whole Earth catalog had a huge access to tools, and as a child, I just poured over it and over it and over it. But my book is kind of like access to a much more specific set of tools, but it includes practical how-to information on a huge variety of skills that loosely compiled under the topics of self-reliance, sustainability, and surviving the long emergency, which is the subtitle of the book. And the subtitle is very accurate. It's kind of what you need to know. And if you just had my book and nothing else and everything really fell apart in the world, you'd be miles ahead of most of the people. But the real great part about the book is that I spent years of my life and over $10,000 on research books, and all of that's put together. So each chapter ends in a resource guide. So you can look and say, okay, I want to go further on this topic than Matt went. Then I give you my mini reviews of the best research materials, DVDs, books, etc., and sources for supplies that you might want to pick up.
Now,
because I can, the book is huge, but I can't teach everything about everything in one book. That's just not possible.
Absolutely. Now, I wonder, even if only for my own personal benefit, Matthew, if you could back up and tell us, and maybe a lot of other people out there who are watching this live over the internet right now, a little bit about yourself. What is your personal time track that led you to this point where you felt that this is the most valuable thing you can do for yourself and to serve the world?
Well, there was a bomb dropped in my lap in 1997. I have a lot of background that's good for writing this book. I grew up hunting and skiing and hiking and climbing in the Northeast and in Vermont when I was a kid. And I'm a mechanical engineer with a Bachelor of Science from MIT. I've had a 30-year interest in renewable energy and alternative healing, all of which ties into sustainability and self-reliance. But back in 1997, at that point, it had been a 20-year practice of daily prayer and meditation. And now it's more like a 30-year practice. I was praying and meditating in the morning, and I asked a simple generic question for guidance and inspiration. And what happened really blew my mind. I received a holographic outline for this book instantaneously dumped into my head. And it was basically pictorial, kind of like a storyboard outline for a movie script. And one moment it wasn't there, and the next moment it was. And my first thought, honestly, was no effing way. I mean, I'm not. There's like, I don't know all this stuff. I can't possibly do this. And what some might refer to as the still small voice in my head assured me that nobody knew it all. And it also assured me that I had the skills and talents that, should I decide to take on this assignment, and it felt much more like my assignment than my idea, that I would receive the inner and the outer help, meaning I would receive the intuitional guidance along with the assistance of various experts and materials I dig up to put this project together. So in a nutshell, what I was shown was that if here with my mechanical engineering Bachelor of Science from MIT, if I was dropped into the middle of the Amazon basin, rainforest, without any high-tech tools, nothing at all other than the clothes on my back, I realized that I could not duplicate or replicate pretty much anything from our technological society. So, and I thought, well, here I am with a backcountry background and an engineering background from one of the best schools in the world, and I'd be stuck. And I thought, you know, if I'm stuck, then the average human being would be 100 times more stuck than me. So the book is about, on the one hand, can we change the course that we're headed on and avoid collapse and create a sustainable world and a new renaissance? And on the other hand, it's the practicalities of, hey, even if we do this right, we're going to have some major bumps in the road where things are going to fall apart to some degree, at least for a period of time, and we're going to have to fend somewhat for ourselves. So, and if we do it wrong, then our civilization will collapse and many of the people in the world will perish. And so, and the global, you know, our global economy will be poof, it'll be history. So the book is about the practicalities of coping with varying levels, everything from minor inconveniences to major meltdowns, and also about waking up to what's really going on and what it's really going to take to make a sustainable future. You know, I believe it's doable, difficult but doable. You know, defeating Hitler was extremely difficult, and it never would have happened if it was number 10 on the world's priority list. It had to be number 1, and it barely happened at number 1. And creating a sustainable world is a greater difficulty than defeating Hitler, but it's doable, just like defeating Hitler was doable.
I'm very impressed, Dave. Michael. Sorry, Matthew, I beg your pardon. For some reason, I want to call you Dave.
Well, that's okay. Just think about Matt as in door.
Yeah, right, sure. Please forgive me that. It's because I don't know your work, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so very interested, and I'm immediately impressed by your story. And I have a little bit of the same background as you do. I'm not an engineer, but I'm a physicist. I regard myself as a practical guy. I'm what the Americans would call a backwoodsman myself. I've done my own share of skiing on Killington, and I've done a lot of mountaineering and rafting, and I've been across the desert in the Kalahari and everything else you can think of. And I regard myself as somebody who knows what to do if they get dumped in the middle of nowhere. And I have had exactly those same thoughts that, you know what, I'm not even sure if I could light a fire, let alone catch a rabbit and cook it and make my own clothes and build my own shelter and all of this other stuff if I didn't happen to have a knife in my pocket. You know, so I was inspired personally to start thinking about this by a BBC television series which you may be familiar with, and I cannot remember the title of it, but it was a brilliantly conceived reality show. And if I remember it right, this was a few years ago, they had 4 people who they put together in a survival situation. There was a physicist. It was something like this. It was a physicist, a biologist, a chemist, and some kind of technologist or an engineer or a technician guy. And they would put them in the middle of nowhere, and they'd have to build a battery or a water wheel or some means of lighting themselves in the dark or something like that, some kind of primitive science project, absolutely on the banks of some muddy river in the middle of New Guinea or something, you know. And the ingenuity that they displayed as they were doing a running commentary to the camera was really very, very enlightening about, you know, how you can use natural plants and fruits for sources of acid to combine with certain, you know, etc., etc. You get the picture. How you can recreate something that resembles the Baghdad battery, you know, all of this kind of thing.
Well, I think we ought to let him tell us just sort of things.
Well, hey, I'm getting enthusiastic here. but
is there a question in there somewhere?
Somewhere in... Somewhere in here there's a question. And the question which I wanted to put to Matthew was, is this a more fundamentally focused book than, for example, Holly Deo's Dare to Prepare? And you may not know, we were talking to Stan Deo on the same video link this time yesterday. We didn't talk to Holly, but we talked to Stan Deo. You must be familiar with Holly Deo's book, but...
Yeah, it's an excellent book. And, you know, everybody who writes a book like this has a different take and a different perspective. So Stan and Holly's book is really excellent and covers some things more in depth than mine. But if you were, you know, realistically, the future scenario, the probable future scenario that I see is that we will, there, you know, at least in the United States, vested interests, lobbyists, and you know, the powers of business as usual are so, have their hands in the pockets of pretty much everybody in Congress, including the president. So the chance of getting really wide-ranging change that's needed to avoid collapse at this point in time is pretty slim. So realistically, most of us will not be in the Amazon basin with no access to anything, but what we will be is we will be scavenging the leftovers from our current society, and we will be using 18th century technologies, and we'll be working together, because not everybody knows everything, to create a reasonable standard of living and a reasonable life. And that's really what my book is about. It's about how do you heal yourself when you don't have the high-tech meds? How do you purify water? What kind of great high-tech gadgets should you have on hand to help out in the event of short-term meltdowns? And in the event that things happen long-term and those gadgets are no longer available, or they've worn out, or they've failed, then how do you do it the old-fashioned ways? So my take on things is quite different from Stan and Holly's book, but they're complementary. There's stuff in my book that's in their book, and there's stuff in theirs that's not in mine, and vice versa.
I completely understand that. Is there anything, I mean, for instance, are you assuming no electricity, for example, or is that just one scenario which you explore, but you also explore others?
I'm not assuming anything in that I don't pretend to know the answer. What I will tell you, you know, I'm 52 years old. I've had 2 visions in my life, so it's not like I'm somebody who sees and hears stuff, you know, all the time, and sees and hears voices. But I will admit, like this, just to give you some idea, the indication from the other side, call them the masters, the guides, spirit, Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, was that millions of people would be needing the information in my book in the not too distant future. Now realize that when I received this information was 1997, roughly Thanksgiving, give or take a few days. That's late November. I forget, you guys aren't in the U.S., so you might have no idea when Thanksgiving in the U.S. is. But it's late November 1997. At that point in time, .com was booming. Business in America couldn't be better. Gasoline was probably at a 30-year low when you factored inflation in. And really everything on the outside looked particularly rosy and beautiful and wonderful. And I get this semi-apocalyptic project dropped in my lap. But now, 10 years later, 12 years later, you know, it's rather obvious that our world is in trouble in many different situations and, you know, from many different points of view. So it's clear now why I needed to write the book. And so these kinds of skills, now part of the scenarios is no electricity, but naturally I'm hoping that we do the right thing and our world doesn't fall apart, and that we have access to electricity and renewable energy, and that we continue to go in that direction. So as oil and fossil fuels decline, that we are in decent shape.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that's going to be the case.
Matthew, thank you. That's very interesting, and I appreciate you sort of sharing a little bit about how you came upon writing the book. I'm just curious, since we are here, what is your plan for today for your sort of segment here, because we would like to go with whatever your plan was. In other words, were you going to, and obviously I'm a woman, and I'm not a self-help kind of person necessarily in that respect, but
this is true.
But I'm not completely useless in the woods either, believe me or not. I'm a backpacker from a very young age in the Sierra Nevada. My mother was sort of radical in that respect. But it was your plan, for example, to spend, I don't know, an hour explaining exactly what are the basics one would need and how to go about getting them, or what exactly did you have in mind, perhaps? And then we can follow that down with you.
Okay. Well, what do you say we start out? I'll mention the 6 trends that are headed for collapse, just briefly. I won't go into detail, and I won't go into a huge amount of detail on any of this because we have limited time. And then from there, we can talk about some of the bio threats, some basic emergency things. I'm going to touch on some of the key items that I think everyone should have in call it a 72-hour grab and run kit. Just a few of my favorite items. And on my website, if you want to get details and a full listing, you can go to www.whentechfails.com, and that way you can get the details and not have to worry about what you missed in my talk. And naturally, in my book, there's far more information than we're going to cover today. So let's go there first. The 6 global trends. Right now, each of these trends is a potential civilization buster. You're probably all aware of them already, but I'm just going to go through them very quickly. Now, first one is climate change. Many people are now calling it global weirding because there's global warming, but it's really that we've destroyed shifted some of the systems in the planet that help maintain a stable weather patterns. In other words, in system response engineering talk, think about shock absorbers on a car. The trees, for instance, are a major part of the stability of the planet, so call them some of the shock absorbers. Now, when you cut down the trees, you have something called desertification downwind. Each tree pumps out billions of gallons of water back into the atmosphere over its lifespan. And supposedly, a large, mature conifer or regular deciduous tree has the equivalent evaporative surface area of a 40-acre lake. Now, I find that hard to believe. I've read that in Tom Hartman's book. Whether it's true or not, I haven't backed it up. But it's a big number, even if that number is overblown. So imagine now you driving down the road. If you take off 2 of the shock absorbers on your car, you're going to hit a bump and you're going to start bouncing. You're going to go around a corner. You're going to have trouble staying on the road. That's what we're seeing in our weather, called global weirding. Number 2, peak oil. I understand that you in Europe are far more in agreement that peak oil is happening as we speak. Whether it's this year or next year or 5 years from now, it doesn't really matter that much. And you're pretty aware of that, so I won't go deeply into that. Number 3 is the collapse of the world's oceans. And remember, each of these things alone is a potential civilization buster. And in a sense, they have busted civilizations in the past. But now we have a global civilization where everything is interconnected and intertwined. So when you tape down a major leg, and then parts of the other world start kind of compensating for it. So the problem now is with the global economy, we can keep compensating and pulling from all over the world until it just all falls apart at once because there's no place to pull from anymore. So the oceans. Right now, 11 of 15 of the world's ocean fisheries are either in collapse or on the verge of collapse. A very startling fact was brought to my attention a few months ago that every day there's something washing up on the shores of the Canary Islands that's very disturbing, and that's dead black men and women. These are people from the coast of Africa who for millennia have fished the waters off of their coast in their fishing boats, and they've provided for their families, and they've sold the fish at the market, and they've had a standard of living that was reasonable. Now they're finding that the European and Japanese and Soviet fishing fleets are converging on their coast because the local fisheries are wiped out in those areas. So now they're going to Africa's coast, and the fish are gone. So these people are desperate, and they're getting into their boats, and they're turning them towards Europe, saying, hey, I'm starving here. Maybe I can get a job in Europe and support my family and have a decent life. And many of these boats are not making it, and the people are drowning and ending up dead. That's a symptom. Now, I also heard something like 73% of the ocean's zooplankton have disappeared, according to a recent UK study. Now, this is the bottom of the food chain for the oceans of the world, and many of the people of the world get their protein from the ocean. But on top of that, the oceans are a huge part of the carbon-oxygen cycle in the world. So when you wipe out the bottom of the food chain in the oceans and the plankton, the zooplanktons, then you're disrupting a system that is necessary for maintaining life as we know it on the planet, from a weather point of view, from an oxygen-carbon point of view, and from a protein source for the planet point of view. Now, number 4 is destruction of the forests. I already mentioned that, but 50% of the world's forests are now gone, and a significant portion of the other 50% are in serious decline or not doing very well. And they're also a huge part of the carbon-oxygen cycle. I believe that destruction of the forests right now annually is contributing more CO2 global greenhouse gases than all of the cars in the world and the jets and the airplanes in the world. So it's something that many people don't talk about, but it's a really huge problem. Number 5 is the food crisis. And the food crisis, now realize that these things I'm talking about are all intertwined. Nothing's in a vacuum. They affect each other. So the food crisis is a combination of climate change and unsustainable use of our aquifers all over the planet. We're pumping aquifers. There's places in India where farmers' fathers drew water from wells in buckets. And now they're drilling wells a mile deep before they're finding water. And outside of Beijing, we're in a similar situation. In fact, the most largest construction project in the history of the world is to bring water from a river 800 miles away towards Beijing, because the breadbaskets of India and the breadbaskets of China and the breadbaskets of America have been unsustainably using the groundwater and are running out of water. So a world with a growing population, in a world with a growing need for water for industrialization, is running out of water. There's now something like 6 major rivers in the world, including the Chao Phraya, the Rio Grande, the Colorado in the United States, the Yellow River in China, that either don't reach the ocean for significant parts of the year or reach the ocean just as a dirty trickle of useless water. Now, the last one is population growth, and that's the one that's kind of like the elephant in the room that no one seems to talk about that much. And it kind of boggles my mind, because unless you get that under control, there is no sustainable option. If you have exponential growth of population continues, then there isn't a sustainability. It all collapses. And if nature takes this collapse into its own hands, then a lot of people are going to suffer. Now, to give you an idea, overshoot and collapse. This is the common, it's a common example that's used all the time. And back in 1944, a small herd of reindeer were introduced to St. Matthew's Island off the Bering Sea. Now, the herd was only 29 initially, and it grew exponentially to at least 1,350 by 1957. And in 1963, there were 6,000 reindeer on these islands. Now, it's been estimated from looking at other places that the sustainable limit for reindeer on an island that size was something like 1,800, something like 2,000. So now it was roughly triple the sustainable limit. So what happens is the reindeer eat everything in sight, the soil washes away, the reindeer starve, the island is decimated. Now, in the next 2 years, the population crashed to 42. So it went from 6,000 reindeer to 42 reindeer. So this is nature's way of dealing with overshoot and collapse. And my concern is that if we human beings do not take our proactive use in our minds and say we're going to make changes, that we'll end up like the reindeer on St. Matthew's Island. Okay, so now that's bad news. We also talked about changes. You know, we did defeat Hitler. We ridded most of the world of slavery. At one point in time, cannibalism was common. So people say human beings can't change, but we really can change. So, okay, let's talk about some practical things. I mean, you guys have probably heard and know much of what I've been saying, but let's talk about some practical things. Now, practicalities is your emergency preparations and preparations for the future. Number one is you want to have a good short-term emergency kit on hand, just to cover those kind of meltdowns, bumps in the roads I'm talking about, where things are not going to be available and you need to fend for yourself. Now, to give you an idea of what's really important, one is water. Water is most important. Now, most of us could live for a month or more without food. You might find that hard to believe, but you could do it. Even if you're skinny, unless you're emaciated, you could probably survive at least a month without food. But if the weather's hot, 3 days without water, and some of us will start dying. And if it's extremely hot, like the Arizona desert, and you had to move outside, a single day without water could kill you. Now, I was climbing El Capitan in Yosemite Valley back in 1984, and we took our standard 2 quarts of water per person per day up the cliff with us, and for a 3-day climb. What we didn't count on was record-breaking heat. Probably global warming was starting right then, and we weren't aware of it. And it was pretty terrible. We come the start of day 3, we could have drunk all we had left in water with breakfast and still been thirsty. And we made it last till about the middle of the day. And so I'm climbing up there. And, you know, we want to get off. We didn't want to turn around and go down. And my partner would ask me a question, and I'd start gagging. I'd try to answer and be like, my tongue would stick to the roof of my mouth like super glue, and I'd start retching. And this was so horrible that we got our headlamps out and climbed through the night till we got off the top at about 9 or, I don't know, midnight maybe that night. And found the nearest mud puddle and stuck our faces in it. So water is really, really critical. Now, if you're deprived of water and you're in a situation like I was in, you will drink the most dirty, scummiest, disgusting ditch water if that's all you have to drink, or the local duck pond water, or whatever. So having something on hand to purify that water is a very important thing, and it's low-cost insurance. You know, emergency preparedness is like car insurance. No one drives down the freeway saying, gee, I want to get into a head-on collision today. You know, you're going down the freeway and you hope to God nothing happens, but that insurance covers you in the event something happens. And to have a decent grab-and-run kit, maybe a few weeks of food, maybe a few months of food. You know, one of the beauties about my book is that you don't have to do it all at once. See, I don't have 5 years of food stored up like Stan probably does and, you know, James Wesley Rawls does. But the day may come where my intuitive alarms are going off, or maybe Pakistan and India throw nukes at each other and I know the global economy is melting down, where I say, okay, I got to pull my own book off the shelf, write down a quick, 2 years of food for myself and family and go down and buy it now before the shelves are bare. And so you don't have to be paranoid, you just have to use common sense and start easy and then build up over time. Now, the next thing is food. It's actually the second one over food, I would say, is your health. Because a superbug can come along and take you down in a matter of just a few days or even a few hours at some point in time. And if this bug is going all over the place, you will have no access to medical care. And so having the tools on hand to self-medicate and to zap pretty much any bug or virus that might be out there is an important thing, an important skill, important materials to have on hand. So I'm going to use some time to talk about my favorite things in both the water areas and the bug areas and the medical areas, and then we'll kind of skim over the other things. Now, do you have a preference right now? You guys have been listening to this for a couple of days. Is there an area that you feel you really want to hear my expertise on? Let me put that back to you before I keep rattling forward.
I would ask, my question off the top of my head would be, from where you are, and you must be tracking the trends in global events as closely as anybody, what is your personal best bet as to the likely rollout of events and the likely requirements of people to call upon various elements of your book, let's say in the next couple of years?
I'd say in the next 2 years that having a good 72-hour grab and run kit with really excellent self-medication things like colloidal silver generator is really important, a good water filter. I'm just going to show you a couple of things right now. Like, this is my MSR, Mountain Safety Research. You're probably very familiar with it.
I have one.
And I'm sure you, yeah. This one, Katadyn, also makes really excellent products. But with this, you can pump scummy water. It's cleanable and serviceable. So, if you have a viral type backcountry filter, well, that's great. But the first time you dip it into scummy water, it may be toast and may be worthless. At least with this one, I can take it apart. I can scrub off with a little green scrubby on the outside ceramic cartridge, and I'm back in business again. If I've got something that you hit some bad water in there and it's toast, it's not going to do me much good. Another thing that's great, you probably got this too. This is my SteriPen, and this is a wonderful gadget. You take this and you stick it into the top of a bottle of water. The only requirement is that bottle of water must be clear water. So if it's scummy water, you've got to run it through your filter first and then zap it with the SteriPen. You give the button a click, and a few seconds later, the blue light has gone off, and it's killed all the bacteria and viruses in there.
Does that work with ultraviolet?
It is ultraviolet. It's a UV sterilizing bulb, and you get about 2,000 clicks at 2,000 liters off of a change of batteries. And it's a great gadget. A really good backup, some other backup things to have. And I'd have all of this because water's so important. You don't want to just kind of be relying on one thing. This is called Polar Pure. And this little bottle has some crystals of iodine in there. And you fill the bottle up with water, and the water makes a saturated solution of iodine that's perfect for sterilizing a liter or a quart-size water bottle. And so with this, provided technology's failed, maybe your SteriPen ran out of batteries, you can get a couple thousand quarts or liters purified with this. It doesn't taste as good. I'd much rather use the SteriPen or the water filter any day. But, this is good backup. And this is a really cool gadget from MSR also called Myox. And it makes mixed oxidative halogens. So this little thing gets thousands of clicks also out of a battery, and it has some salt crystals in there, and when they're electrified in the water solution, it makes a sterilizing halogen solution that doesn't taste bad. So you dump it in your quart of water bottle, and half hour later, it's purified. Now, the thing about the Myox, and the thing about this is the Myox and this is the Polar Pure, is that these things don't purify instantly. You got a dwell time. If the water's cold, it could take you an hour and a half to really purify your water. And if the water's warm, it might just take you 15 minutes or a half hour. It could even take a couple hours. And then there's some nasty bugs like Cryptosporidium. That made 500,000 people sick in Milwaukee back a decade ago, and it killed something like 400 people. And Cryptosporidium is a really nasty bug. They live in the guts of cows and cattle and sheep. So if you're in a very big farming community, then you know, your UV bulb and your filter will get rid of cryptosporidium, but the Polar Pure, you know, the Miox, it really won't do it. There is something called Aquamira, which is a chlorine dioxide. And this stuff right here actually will kill everything out there. I mean, it's one of the few chemical treatments that just kills it all. You know, regular chlorine doesn't. In fact, you can take cryptosporidium cysts and soak them in chlorine bleach overnight, and some of them might still be viable the next day. So you're never going to drink a solution of chlorine that's going to get rid of those cysts. Now, let me talk about the health thing a little. This is like the most important thing that I own, you know, I think. This is called a colloidal silver generator. This is from Soda Instruments, and it's called their silver pulsar. Now, you can make this with 3 9-volt batteries, and I show you how in my book, and it'll work just fine. The silver pulsar, though, also does blood electrification. So what you can do is it has an attachment that plugs into it with some electrodes. You take these electrodes, and you get wrist straps, and you strap it onto your wrist like this, both of them beside each other, and they have a little salt solution on them. And what this does is it electrifies the blood. It's like your heart is the pump that's pumping blood through your body, through your wrist, and the 2 electrodes zap the electricity as the blood is pumping underneath in the veins right near the top of your wrist, skin of your wrist. And this is based on patented technology developed at the Albert Einstein University in New York City. And they found that they were successfully able to treat AIDS and hepatitis C patients by taking their blood out of their body, pumping it through an dialysis kind of like machine, and electrifying the blood in the machine and then putting it back in your body. Well, about 15 years ago, a physicist, Bob Beck, was dying. You know, I mean, basically he was told by the doctors that his life was kind of in the last phase and it was over, and that, you know, his health was failing. He'd had an unhealthy lifestyle, no exercise, terrible American diet, and it was history. So Bob Beck was an inventor and a physicist. He invented the electronic flashbulb when he was a teenager, and he ended up selling it for what he thought was a huge amount of money. He sold it for $500, and it paid for his last year of college in those days. You know, this is a long time ago, kind of Depression era. And, well, the guy who bought it made $25 million off it. Anyway, Beck said, you know, all my life I've been a physicist, an inventor. I've developed medical devices, so I'm not going to take this lying down. So he poured through the medical research books, and he came across several kind of groundbreaking findings that had never found economically viable applications in the medical world. And he developed instruments so you could do it yourself. So instead of getting this expensive machine that pumped your blood through it and zapped all the viruses and bugs in the blood, he developed a little blood electrifier that you strap on your own wrist and do it at home while you're watching TV or listening to the radio or playing on the internet or whatever. Then he read the groundbreaking research by, and this is confusing, totally different person, Robert Becker. So Bob Beck, the physicist, read the book, The Body Bioelectric by Robert Becker, who was an orthopedic surgeon and medical researcher researching the body's microelectric healing mechanisms. You know, why can salamanders regrow tails? You know, what makes a frog leg heal? What makes it not heal? He's, you know, really incredible, fascinating book. And one of the things that this medical researcher had found was that charged silver particles were wonderful for 2 reasons. They would kill all known pathogenic bacteria, but they would also help to activate the body's bioelectric healing mechanisms. So the medical researcher, Robert Becker, was able to apply charged silver particles to some of his patients who were scheduled for amputations because they'd had infections in bones that were just not knitting and healing. And no matter what Western medicine did, they weren't able to help these people heal, and they were going to cut their arms and legs off. And he used charged silver particles, and these wounds healed, the bones knit, and they were back in business. So Bob Beck, the physicist, went to sleep one night thinking like, well, how am I going to make this charged silver particles? And he woke up the next day with the pictures in his mind for how to make the modern colloidal silver generator. Now, the people who make the generator I bought, Bob Beck told the world how to do this with 3 9-volt batteries. And then the people who make this, the story is just so fascinating, and it really shows how valuable this stuff is. His wife was an athlete and the head of an athletic corporation. She was an executive in an athletic clothing corporation, and she came down with chronic fatigue syndrome. And she basically was ready to, end her life just about. She was sleeping 14 hours a day. She couldn't do the laundry, couldn't clean the house, couldn't pick the kids up from the bus, couldn't make dinner, do anything. And she'd put on about 60, 70 pounds of weight. So in desperation, they heard about Bob Beck talking about his protocol, the Beck protocol, in Vancouver, and they got in the car and went down and listened to him. Well, her husband is an electrical engineer and designer, and he and Beck really hit it off. So they came home, and the husband made the instruments for himself, and his wife, in 30 days, her health was radically improved, and in 90 days, 3 months' time, she had her life back, and her health was totally back to normal, and she was fully healed. So 3 years of the best of Western medicine couldn't do a thing for her, and in 3 months of the Beck protocol, she was herself again. So they got so turned on by this that they started a company to promote the Beck protocol and to end alternative healing things. And some of these they've actually gotten through the Canadian equivalent of the AMA, American Medical Association. They've gotten them approved in Canada. So they've shown that this stuff really works. So the Beck protocol is a huge thing, and if you just Google it on your computer, on the internet, you'll find far more information than I can give you here, and some incredible testimonials by people who were sent home from the hospital to get a hold of hospice, people who are dying of cancers and other terminal illnesses, sent home, said, that's it, we cut your colon out, we cut your breasts off, whatever we did, we radiated you, we chemoed you, and there's nothing else we can do, the cancer's all over, and your life is over, and go home and get your affairs in order. And these people blew their doctors away a couple years later, showing up totally healthy, cancer-free in their doctor's office, and just blew the doctor's mind. So this stuff works. Now, where would you like to go next?
I have a question that was reminded for me to think about, actually by one of our whistleblower contacts who've been briefed about this kind of stuff on the inside. And it's a question that hadn't occurred to me and hadn't occurred to a lot of people I spoke to, which is, what about do-it-yourself dental care? Because if you don't have modern, civilized access, let us say, and you've got a dental problem, that may wish that you were no longer here. That's serious sometimes.
Well, that is serious sometimes. And I'll give you one of the things I've done. Well, first I'm going to recommend a book. Like, one of the great things about, in my book, you can go in there and say, okay, what's the best book on this? Well, Where There Is No Dentist, is a book everyone should have in their backup library, along with Where There Is No Doctor. A couple of excellent books to have on hand, and they're recommended in my, probably in the healing chapter or in the first aid chapter of mine. Now, one of the things about silver is I was told years ago, well, I had gum disease and pockets, and when I had the days when I worked as the director of engineering for Haas Company and still had good medical insurance, unlike you guys in Europe, I got to worry about that stuff in America, I had gum surgery done to repair these pockets. Well, another decade goes by, and I'm in Hawaii working as a contractor and don't have quite the level of insurance anymore because I'm paying it for it myself. And my dentist says, oh, you need gum surgery again. You got 9mm pockets in your gums. They're really bad and you need surgery again. I said, well, let me see what I can do about that. So I started making myself a quart a day of colloidal silver and using it in my water pick and washing my gums with it. Well, next visit to the dentist, first one hygienist is jabbing my gums all over. She calls the next lady over. She starts jabbing my gums. Calls the dentist over. He starts jabbing my gums. I said, wait a minute. They said, what's going on? They said, well, you know, I think we've made a mistake, Mr. Stein, because on our chart it says you have 9mm pockets, but all I can find is 3s and 4s. And I said, no, you know I had 9mm pockets because I asked the hygienist to show me them with the mirror so I could focus my water pick on them with this silver solution. And so I'd gone in 6 months' time from being a sure candidate for gum surgery to having totally healthy gums. So and one of my friends said that when I told him the story, said that he did the similar thing. He just started washing his mouth out twice a day with a mouthwash with homemade colloidal silver, and his pockets disappeared. Now, I'll caveat that. We shared the same dentist now, who's an alternative, a homeopathic kind of alternative dentist, and he said, no, Matt, there's a world of difference between your gums and his gums. Your gums are great. His gums are not so great. So the mouthwash helped, but didn't really do it like the water pick with the colloidal silver did. Now, I do encourage everybody, right now while the world is still working well, if you have corrective surgery, if you want to get rid of some of your mercury amalgams in your mouth, you know, if you need something medically and dentally done, please don't put it off. You know, you don't want to be suffering when things really fall apart and saying, oh God, why didn't I have that tooth dealt with? Now I just got to get some pliers and get somebody to just yank that tooth out, you know, and there's no other alternative. So, you know, deal with that kind of stuff. Whatever you can, try to deal with them ahead of time.
Now, about 5 minutes ago, I think I asked you the question, not only what would it be most useful for people to focus on, in your opinion, but what might be the rollout of events in the next 2 years that would lead people to have to rely on these sorts of improvised technologies?
Well, I would say there's several scenarios that could easily happen, and I won't say they will happen. Now imagine that Pakistan and India threw some nukes at each other, and that I could see that easily causing our current global meltdown to look like a picnic. Now imagine that one of the people, and this has been tried already, so the Straits of Hormuz, and the huge ship docking station in Saudi Arabia, where, you know, a significant chunk of the world's oil flows through. Now imagine that those straits were knocked out with some missile attacks on some tankers, and the straits were just filled with dead ships that would take years to clear. Now imagine that the swine flu is not the epidemic, the global pandemic that everyone worried it might be. Now, the swine flu is a pandemic. It is going all over the world, but it's not that serious of a disease. It doesn't, it's killing a few healthy young women and men are dying. A few teenagers and kids that are previously healthy are dying, but the numbers aren't huge. They're down in like the half of 1%, quarter of 1% kind of range. Now, if we had something like the bird flu that mutated into a form that was easily transmitted like the swine flu is, then we would have a situation where everything in the world that we know of today would shut down. I mean, back in the 1918, roughly 20 to 50 million people, it was estimated, died worldwide. The doctors and nurses went home to care for their family. There were no plane shipments then, but the trucking shut down, the trains, the railway shut down, the boat freight shut down. A lot of business in the world just kind of shut down. And in those days, a lot of stuff was made locally. So if the global shipments shut down, it wasn't a big deal, or not such a big deal. But right now, today, if that happens, it's a huge deal. And everything stops. Your food delivery stops, your medicine stops, your electricity stops, your sewage treatment stops, your water treatment stops, everything. So, I mean, that's a scenario that's very real. Now, let me add one more thing on this. There is a patented nanoparticle multivalent silver solution from American Biotech Labs called ABL. You can Google them. They're in my book also. And they developed this because about 10, 15 years back, they had a silver mine, Clifton Mining in Utah, in the United States. And the global price of silver had depressed so much that it cost them more to mine their silver than they could sell it for. So they thought, well, maybe we can make some, medical silver, colloidal silver product. So they came up with a high voltage process to make this, and all of a sudden they found that something was different. They ended up spending eventually something like $4 million, both finding out why it was different, and then proving that it was effective against over 143 pathogenic bacteria, and then patenting it. And now they've found they funded a study at the National Institute for Health lab at the Utah State University to do an avian flu challenge test. And they found that with a very small amount, in humans it's equal to 2 teaspoons a day, twice a day, taking this multivalent nanoparticle silver solution, that it was far more effective than any known medicine, any Tamiflu, any known medicine known to man against viruses like the avian flu. So they took the most virulent form of avian flu known to man, which is 70% fatal. The normal avian flu, which is hard for people to get, but once they do get it, then it kills half of the people who get it, if they do get it. This particular strain is actually 70% fatal. And they took this strain and they injected lethal amounts into rodents, and then they used the silver biotic solution, ABL silver solution, and they found that they cut the mortality rate down by over 50%. They cut it down to 30% from 70%. Now, in America, to get like a Tamiflu approved, 10% improvement is significant enough to get a medicine approved. And there is nothing out there that could survive a challenge test with a fatal amount of avian flu directly injected into the lungs and more than double the survival rate out of that. So typically, none of us is going to have that situation where somebody injects a fatal amount directly into our lungs. So the 2 teaspoons a day, I'd up it to 2 tablespoons 3 times a day if there's something serious going around. That stuff will deactivate viruses. It'll deactivate the avian flu, it'll kill pathogenic bacteria, it'll keep you safe. And if you find you are sick, then you have to drink something more like 4 ounces immediately, and then drink 2 to 3 tablespoons like 5 times a day until well. Now, how well does it work? I'll tell you, the colloidal silver worked well enough to save my wife's life years ago when she was suffering from an antibiotic-resistant infection. Now, this is not the super silver stuff from ABL. This is the homemade stuff. She'd gone through several months of antibiotic treatments. The first 2 types of antibiotics did nothing. Then it went up to Cipro. And after 3 courses of Cipro, it would get it under control every time she was on the Cipro, but 2 to 3 days after she got off the Cipro, it came back. Cipro is very toxic. It was starting to harm her kidneys. She might have been on a dialysis machine if she kept up with the Cipro. We did the colloidal silver. We also did grapefruit seed extract, GSC, another thing that I suggest everybody have. And you can look on my website to find an article under articles on really great alternative meds and herbs to have on hand. And there's more than I'm talking about today. I'm just giving you my favorites today. So anyway, within a week's time, she was totally healed and better. So a couple of $1,000s, several months of antibiotics didn't do it. A week with these alternatives that did it. Now the ABL stuff, a month ago, Hollywood, the BBC America actually flew me down to Hollywood. I can't talk about the details, as a consultant for a possible new reality TV show. And on my way home, I went to sleep, took a nap on the airplane. I woke up, I felt horrible. My nose was running, I was sneezing. I don't know if there was molds in the air conditioning that was getting to me or if I'd picked up swine flu from somebody. When I came home and I pounded some of the ABL stuff that night and did some more the next day, totally gone, totally kicked it. Don't know what it was. I suspect it was swine flu, but I was totally fine. So all I had was one uncomfortable night from that. And you know, that night even wasn't that bad. So this stuff works.
Okay, Speaking about reality TV shows, Are you familiar with the planned reality TV show that's got to do with survivors coping with the aftermath of a plague that decimates civilization in the same way as you've just described?
I'm not familiar with that, but that's certainly one of the scenarios that we were looking at in this show. So.
Gotcha.
I have just a question from the audience that says, if you can put together or show the survival kit that you would suggest people have. In other words, I know you're going through individual things, but what is the actual, do you have an actual kit kind of thing?
Well, I have, here's a lot of it right here. Let's see, can you see it? Big blue tub.
It's a big blue tub.
Yeah.
It's
right,
hard
it's
to see.
But
it's a little hard to see, Matthew, how big it is. It's a little hard to see how big it is because of the fisheye lens.
It's pretty big. And I have backpacks and backcountry gear. So, you see, I live in earthquake country and wildfire country. So, if there's a bad earthquake in this area, and it's not during the winter or rainy season, chances are fires will start out, and trucks won't be able to get over bridges, fires will be going everywhere, and I'll need to get on my bicycle or my backpack and take me and my family out of harm's way with just what I can carry on my back. Because once you hit a down bridge, there's going to be no going. Even though I've got a four-wheel drive truck for where I live with heavy snows in the winter, if the roads aren't plowed or the bridges are out, you're stuck unless you got to get off and hoof it from there. Now, on my website, www.whentechfails, there's a full list of the grab and run kit. But you can also go to YouTube, and the Yuba Gals made a video of me going through, it's an hour-long video, so we're not about to do it now, of all the items in my grab and run kit. So you're welcome, if you Google my name and go to that video on YouTube, then you'll be able to find that. So when you Google me, you'll be able to find that video, and it's a grab and run kit, 72-hour kit, grab and run, something like that.
Very useful stuff.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's very useful. Okay, well, thank you for that explanation about colloidal silver, and just a couple quick comments. We interview whistleblowers. I'm not sure if you know that, but one of our whistleblowers did say that Cipro may be infected. So I understand you're not advocating that, and it's just for people out there that are thinking, Cipro might be an alternative for beating the flu.
Well,
I wouldn't advise it.
There's one other thing I'd really have on hand, and a couple more things. Oregano oil, very broad-based, grapefruit seed extract. You can get it for very cheap at a health food store in America, whether it's available in the EU or not, I'm not sure. But another powerful herb that I'm sure you can probably get your hands on is hyssop, Hyssop. And I buy it a pound at a time. Now, I might sound a little flaky here, but my wife at another time had an antibiotic-resistant lung infection, pneumonia-type viral pneumonia or bacterial antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It was never quite clear, but it wouldn't respond to any antibiotics. And it also, lung infections don't do very well with colloidal silver unless you get an inhaler, which I didn't know at the time, and actually breathe it in for 30 minutes a day. But what we did find was the herb hyssop kicked it. Now, according to Michael Tierra, who's one of the world's foremost herbalists, he said that in Chinese medicine, hyssop is commonly used for lung ailments, and to his knowledge, it's the only herb that he knows of effective against active tuberculosis. So in this day and age where extreme drug-resistant tuberculosis, XDR, has the potential to be a truly devastating pandemic plague in the world, and so to have hyssop on hand, to have colloidal silver, the ability to make it yourself, buy a gallon or a quart of the ABL super stuff and keep that on hand. I like to be able to make it myself in case, but I like to have the super stuff too in case, because there is a danger with the colloidal silver. If you really overdo it, you could turn silver. It's called argyria. And there's a blue man who's been on TV numerous times in America. But he pounded a quart a day for 16 years to deal with a skin affliction that wouldn't respond to Western medications and pharmaceuticals. And after 16 years of it, he had a period where his kidneys weren't working very well and weren't taking the silver out of the blood like they normally do, and it ended up depositing in his skin. And it didn't make him sick, but it made him look really funny, and he'll look that way the rest of his life. So it is possible to overdo it, so there's a caution on that.
Okay, thank you for the cautionary note.
Yeah, you look like Papa Smurf if you overdo it, and you'll look that way forever.
That's really very funny. All right. We're starting to run up against time here. Personally, I could talk to you for a very long time, and I'm fascinated by your work. I'm definitely going to buy your book. We'd love to talk to you later about this stuff. My personal opinion is that you're doing something very valuable here, and I really want to say this here for the public.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to leave people with my motto, and then I'm done. I know you're short of time, but my motto is to do your best to change the world, and to do your best to be ready for the changes in the world. And thank you so much for having me on today.
Okay, well, don't go away just yet, because we are going to have questions from the audience for about 10 minutes. They say we've got about 10 minutes to go. So if you're willing to do that, we'd love to have the audience ask you some questions.
Totally willing.
Okay, great.
One other item. This is one of the most important things for your grab and run kit, and I'm sure, Bill, you're familiar.
Well, Bill loves that thing, so.
A headlamp so you can work on your car. It's waterproof, it's lightweight. The new ones are so great compared to the ones 20 years ago. They got lightweight batteries. It's like, this is the thing. It's never in my grab and run kit because I use it all the time.
Yep, and I couldn't agree more with that. Is that a Petzl LED lamp you got there, or is it something else? It's a little hard to see from here what it was you had.
Oh, I'm not sure. I got it at REI in America. My son actually bought it for me.
Okay.
No, it's called Princeton Tech. Oh, and this is something else you got to have. This is 1.5" cloth adhesive tape. And I was telling this story. You know, if you're not used to backcountry stuff, you put your shoes on, you got to run down the road. A mile down the road, your feet are probably going to blister up. And then once those blisters pop and bleed, you're not going much of anywhere fast. I told this story to a super survivalist guy who was interviewing me. He has a gun collection that would blow your mind, something like 75 guns in his collection. And he laughed and said, you know, I was hiking in the Grand Canyon a decade back, and I didn't have tape or moleskin with me, and my heels blew out so bad that I had to call and get a helicopter in. And the helicopter picked me up in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And the first thing he said is, you better have a credit card, and it better have a lot of credit left on it, because this is going to cost you, buddy. So this little bit of tape could save your life.
Or a lot of money. You're right, yeah. I gotcha. I don't go anywhere without moleskin, and I've been down the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I know what you're talking about. Okay, enough of this. We could tell stories to each other all the time. We've got a question here.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, this is Mark from Germany, from the Black Forest, and I really appreciate your work. Thanks for that, for giving that to the public. And I have one question, since you were talking about colloidal silver and nano silver. In my research, what I found out was very difficult, that many things that are being promoted are in the States, were like easy to get, that are really hard to get in, either not, like you can't get them in Europe, and you can't order them in America because they get stuck in the customs, because you can't import any medical things. This is my first question. And about that nano silver, if you know anyone who has that in Europe. And then Dr. Bill Deagle, if you know him, was talking about, and his side often about, how's it called, activated iodine. And he always promoted that also as a kind of a wonder weapon, if you know anything about that.
Well, I don't know anything about the activated iodine, and so it sounds like something I need to look into. As far as the silver is concerned, in my book I show you how to make it with 3 9-volt batteries, so you can make it very easily and make it for yourself. The Canadian company is SOTA Instruments, S-O-T-A, not soda, S-O-D-A, but S-O-T-A. And they do sell, I believe, to overseas, but you might contact them directly to find out if they do or not. And American Biotech Labs, they do ship all over the planet. I buy the stuff. And if you pool together with some people, you could buy 4 gallons at a time, wholesale cost. They'll ship wholesale for 4 gallons at a time. And clinics in Africa have been buying it by the gallons because they find that 3 tablespoons 3 to 5 times a day is kicking malaria in 5 days' time. And so in Africa, they're saying it's the low-cost alternative. Plus, it doesn't matter whether it's drug-resistant malaria or not. It still kicks it. So I mean, I can't speak because I never had malaria, but that's what I hear from Africa. And they're also using it in India very successfully with clinics in India to fight a number of things.
Sorry to interrupt. You're speaking of regular colloidal silver, right? I know about. You can get that here. Oh, you mean about the nano?
I'm speaking of the nanoparticle stuff.
And you can produce them yourself as well?
You can't produce that yourself. That's a patented high voltage process, and that's not something that's the regular homemade stuff you can produce yourself. And to be honest with you, the homemade stuff may work nearly as well. You do have to take a larger quantity. You will be taking more silver into your body. If you do it long term, a greater risk of progeria, which with the nanoparticle stuff you'll never risk because it doesn't bond to the fats in your skin. And so So I like to have both on hand. I mean, I always want to have the ability to make it myself because you can't always buy it. And so if something's going around, I'll make it myself and I'll drink a bunch. But on a daily use, I like to take a tablespoon a couple times a day of the ABL stuff, and I feel like I'm really well covered. I'm not getting sick.
Hi. Thank you for your talk. It's very interesting. However, your grab and run kit looks quite technical still by sort of third world standards. And I get literature from an intermediate technology company, charity, which shows a water filter which looks a whole deal simpler, which can actually provide clean water for a whole village. And it's a sort of dustbin which has several layers of grit and gravel and sand, and the water sort of sinks down through and it's sort of pure at the bottom. And basically that's how it works. And then another way of cleaning water is surely just to boil it, like a gypsy over a fire.
Well, boiling will kill every known pathogen, but it will not take out toxic chemicals. And the carbon core in the water filters will take that out. And in my book, I do show people how to make a sand filter. And also I talk about solar SODIS, which is solar disinfection. And you can effectively disinfect your water if you have clear water bottles, like throwaway, mineral water bottles. And you take those bottles and fill them with water, and if you lay them sideways in the sun, in 6 hours' time, the UV from the sun will have killed the pathogens or deactivated the pathogens inside the water bottle. Won't do anything about toxic poisons, like when Hurricane Katrina hit the United States and all the water was flowing by pig farms and chemical plants and stuff like that. You need an activated carbon core and a filter to take that stuff out.
Okay, thank you.
Or a really good sand filter with carbon in it.
Thank you. And what do you do when you run out of batteries?
Well, there's the filter doesn't require batteries, but you will use it up eventually. Yeah. But that's where solar disinfection, boiling water, and sand filters. Sand filters develop a gelatinous layer on top of the sand that helps to take out most of the pathogens, and there's nothing high-tech about a sand filter at all. In fact, the longer you use it, the better and more effective it gets, because natural bacteria, probiotic bacteria, start processing the nasty bacteria and making your water pretty decent to drink without having to boil it.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a question about, first of all, I heard that the plastic in bottles, you have to be careful if you're going to put a bottle in the sun, that apparently they're saying now that the plastic, if bottles live left in the sun, cause breast cancer in women if they drink the water. I don't know if this is true or not, but
it's supposedly it's true that the polycarbonate, which I still have a bunch of those bottles around because they didn't leave a plastic taste, that supposedly long-term, especially in the heat, in the polycarbonate bottles, that there's some components that are not good for the body, and they're kind of estrogen-like components, and long-term they can cause health issues. Now, if short-term, 6 hours in the sun isn't going to cause that if you're flushing the water out, but long-term storage in polycarbonate bottles is discouraged now, and I think that if you take any of those, for instance, the bottles you set in the sun for 6 hours are going to have far less leaching into them than sitting in hot warehouses for months before it gets on the shelf at your grocery store and your supermarket. So, you know, in a survival situation, that would be the least of my concerns, to be honest with you. But naturally, I think making your own bottled water, quality water at home with a filter is far better than filling landfill waste with tons of poly bottles, of PET bottles from drinking mineral water. So I'm a big fan, and in fact, when I traveled through Europe for the first time in my life, and I loved it a few years ago, my wife's from Holland, and her dad was a Dutch resistance fighter. When I traveled through Europe, I brought my MSR water filter with me everywhere I went, so I could take lousy tasting tap water and make great tasting bottled water, quality water every day to refill my bottles before I did my daily jaunt around, you know, Paris or Belgium and Holland, where I was hanging out.
Okay, so we're inviting a few other questions, but also I had a question about oregano. Is oregano pills as good as the oil?
You know, I don't know. I hear the oil is very, very, one of the most powerful, effective antifungals, and it's also antibacterial. So I take the capsules with the oil in it, and I also have the oil topically. As a climber whose feet incubated fungus in the hot sun in Yosemite for years, I've got problems in that area. So I use the oregano oil to self-medicate that. And I take the capsules orally every day, but you can also use it topically. A friend of mine who suffers from gum disease says she uses the oregano oil every time a pocket flares up with an infection in her gums. She dabs the oregano oil on, and it burns like crazy, but it zaps the pocket, and it's fine the next day.
Okay. Matthew, this is Rudy from Belgium. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of living off the grid.
Certainly.
Okay. I was wondering if you have some advice on that concept. If you, as an individual, would like to live off the grid, what would you do? What would be the most important thing that you would do?
Well, I would definitely like to live off the grid. And my sister has lived off the grid for 15 years now. And unfortunately, all of the equity in the home, which was really all of my savings, went into writing my book, and my first publisher was bankrupt. So I'm in the financial situation of, and he never paid me. So I'm in the same financial hot water that many people in America are in, and hopefully my book will do well now that I'm getting paid, and I'll actually be able to buy some land like I used to have years ago and live off the grid. And as far as living off the grid, there's wonderful, you know, just wonderful technology now for having renewable energy source to power your home and live quite well off the grid. But naturally, energy conservation and energy efficiency is extremely important, and much more so when you get off-grid than on-grid, because, for instance, it'd cost you $20,000 to power an inefficient refrigerator in terms of solar panels, and $2,000 to power an efficient one. So there's a no-brainer there that when you're off-grid and you're responsible for generating all the power you consume, that you must use your power wisely and efficiently.
Hi, I'm Reno from Belgium. I have a question about the UVs, actually. I've been told that the artificial UVs are making not a good thing to water, that water under sun is good because it's all the energy of the sun, that it's not only UVs, but that your little pencil thing with UVs waves maybe from what I've been told, it would be maybe not so good. So I don't know what you know about it.
Well, from a vibrational point of view, like I think it's a Japanese, Inamoto, who wrote about water and vibrations, you're probably right in that respect, that the natural sunlight vibrationally is better for the water, and so from that point of view, kind of along the lines of homeopathy, the water's probably healthier for you. From the point of view of, simplicity and not getting sick from water, if to take some clear water out of a river and give it a click with your pen and 30 seconds later be able to drink that water, from a simplicity and ease point of view, that's a great way to go. But I can understand vibrationally. I don't honestly have any information. I'm just speculating that what you're talking about is the vibrational aspects of water. And I understand vibrational aspects in some degree, and that I tell an anecdote in my book about a lady who was taking a healing class, and she subsequently became a very powerful spiritual healer. And one of the exercises in the class was you take a jug of water and you would set it on the deck and you'd pray over it and hold your hand over it every time you went in and out of the house. Well, the water in that area was not drinkable. It was just disgusting tasting water. I'm not sure if it was sulfur or what, but everyone had the Culligan man come out and install special water treatment filters with media beds to suck out the particular bad tasting things that were in the water in the local area. So one day her uncle was horribly sick and had a horrendous fever, and there was no bottled water left in the house. So the daughter went out and saw the jug on the front of the deck and grabbed the jug and brought it in and gave it to the uncle, and he drank it and then promptly went to sleep. He woke up in the morning totally healed and said, "What was that water? That was the most sweetest tasting, best tasting water I've ever had." Well, it was tap water that was normally undrinkable. It had been prayed over every day, and it had been out in the sunshine. And this tap water that was undrinkable, swill, turned out to be the most incredible healing water, and the guy woke up totally healed and well. So vibration exists. It's not scientifically understood very well, but in my experience, it's real.
Hello, Matthew. Jeroen here from Holland. I've got a question from the audience here. Do you know EM, effective microorganisms? And
no, I don't. That's something, again, I'm not familiar with.
Groetjes to your wife from Holland. And Bill's going to ask you now the last question.
Okay.
Well, actually, I was going to say that I know about EM, effective microorganisms. I spilled a whole bunch of milk and yogurt in my car, and the result was such that I felt like trading in my car for another one. And this product, which is simply called effective microorganisms, I sprayed it in an aerosol in my car. I left it in the car for 24 hours with the windows up, and when I came back, those microorganisms had done some kind of an automatic job. They just gobbled up anything that shouldn't be there, and it was as pure as anything in the middle of in that car afterwards. It's like nothing had happened. I couldn't believe it. It's
well,
the kind
I
of
use
the ultimate
something like that here. I've never heard of EM, but in the States, we've had severe mold issues where we happened to rent a house with 3 of the foremost infamous toxic black molds, including Stachybotrys, Aspergillus, and Fusarium in Hawaii. And it nearly killed my wife and my mother-in-law, made my son and his friends very sick. It probably was what killed the prior owner of the house. And we contaminated our house here after having to pack up and leave there. Some of the stuff we brought back, we tried to purify in the sunlight and various things. And we did have an issue in our house here. And so I spray a fogger. I use these probiotic microorganisms that eat up molds and nasty bugs. And I sprayed that underneath and inside my house. And it's what made their house livable for us after we reinfected it with the nasty bugs from Hawaii. So probably very similar. People have said that they can spray it on wallpaper that's like discolored and got funny stuff growing on it, and then the wallpaper returns to its prior look.
It seems to have a built-in high intelligence that it knows what to go for and what to take out, and leaves the good stuff alone, which beats the hell out of me how that's possible. but I think we're talking about the same thing. I've got one last question. This really is the last question now. It's a written question being handed to me by a good friend of ours from Malta. And he says, I live in Malta, Mediterranean island surrounded by sea. Most of the water has to be processed from seawater as there's not enough rain water available. Thus, we are dependent on reverse osmosis plants. What would you suggest in the case of a prolonged power loss? What a good question.
Well, in a prolonged power loss,
to process seawater.
I have heard that you can dig pits in the sand near the ocean. You'll have to find a distance from the beach, from the ocean to where you can get drinkable water that's fresh water and not too salty. So that would probably be your easiest and fastest way of getting a reasonable personal supply of water in a place like that. You can also do solar stills, but it tends to kill the plants. So if you wrap, and this is a survival technique. I honestly, I've never done it myself, and it's in all the survival manuals, including the survival chapter in my book. And I question how valuable it really is, but they say you can wrap a waterproof membrane around plants, and the plants will act as a water pump where their roots suck up the water into the plant, and then it evaporates off the leaves, and at night it hits the cooler air on the outside of your waterproof tarp or raincoat or whatever you wrap the plant with, and you leave a little pot of water, and you make it in such a way that it drips into a little pot, and you get some water out of that. And if you rotate it from plant to plant, then you probably won't cook the plants. But my experience is when you wrap a plant in plastic in the sun, it cooks the plant pretty quick. And they also say if the soil is moist, then you can do the same thing. Dig a pit with moist soil and tarp over it, and weight the tarp with a rock in the center and around the outside, and put a pot underneath to catch the drips off the tarp at night. And those are called solar stills. So those are all some different options, but reverse osmosis is certainly the easiest, though it's technologically dependent.
Okay, Matthew, thank you very much. We're going to wrap this up here. I can think of questions that would go on all night, but that would bore everyone to pieces. And I'm definitely going to buy your book. I'm very grateful to you again for the information which you've shared with us and a whole bunch of people listening on the internet, watching on the internet, and also this is going to be archived. Maybe we can pick up with you later. I'd certainly like to keep in touch with you. Themselves in the dark or something like that, some kind of primitive science project absolutely on the banks of some muddy river in the middle of New Guinea or something, And the ingenuity that they displayed as they were doing a running commentary to the camera was really very, very enlightening about, how you can use natural plants and fruits for sources of acid to combine with certain, etc., etc. You get the picture. How you can recreate something that resembles the Baghdad battery, all of this kind of thing.
Well, I think we ought to let him tell us just sort of things.
Well, hey, I'm getting enthusiastic here. But
is there a question in there somewhere?
Somewhere in here there's a question. And the question which I wanted to put to Matthew was, is this a more fundamentally focused book than, for example, Holly Deo's Dare to Prepare? And you may not know, we were talking to Stan Deo on the same video link this time yesterday. We didn't talk to Holly, but we talked to Stan Deo. You must be familiar with Holly Deo's book, but...
Yeah, it's an excellent book. And, everybody who writes a book like this has a different take and a different perspective. So Stan and Holly's book is really excellent and covers some things more in depth than mine. But if you were, realistically, the future scenario, the probable future scenario that I see is that we will, at least in the United States, vested interests, lobbyists, and the powers of business as usual have their hands in the pockets of pretty much everybody in Congress, including the president. So the chance of getting really wide-ranging change that's needed to avoid collapse at this point in time is pretty slim. So realistically, most of us will not be in the Amazon basin with no access to anything, but what we will be, and if you just had my book and nothing else and everything really fell apart in the world, you'd be miles ahead of most of the people. But the real great part about the book is that I spent years of my life and over $10,000 on research books, and all of that's put together. So each chapter ends in a resource guide, so you can look and say, okay, I want to go further on this topic than Matt went. Then I give you my mini reviews of the best research materials, DVDs, books, etc., and sources for supplies that you might want to pick up. Because I can, the book is huge, but I can't teach everything about everything in one book. That's just not possible.
Absolutely. Now, I wonder, even if only for my own personal benefit, Matthew, if you could back up and tell us, and maybe a lot of other people out there who are watching this live over the internet right now, a little bit about yourself. What is your personal time track that led you to this point where you felt that this is the most valuable thing you can do for yourself and to serve the world?
Well, there was a bomb dropped in my lap in 1997. I have a lot of background that's good for writing this book. I grew up hunting and skiing and hiking and climbing in the Northeast and in Vermont when I was a kid. And I'm a mechanical engineer with a Bachelor of Science from MIT. I've had a 30-year interest in renewable energy and alternative healing, all of which ties into sustainability and self-reliance. But back in 1997, at that point, it had been a 20-year practice of daily prayer and meditation, and now it's more like a 30-year practice. I was praying and meditating in the morning, and I asked a simple generic question for guidance and inspiration, and what happened really blew my mind. I received a holographic outline for this book instantaneously dumped into my head. And it was basically pictorial, kind of like a storyboard outline for a movie script. And I'm
waking up at the start of the end of the world, but it's feeling just like every other morning before. Now I wonder what my life is gonna mean if it's gone. The cars are moving like a half a mile an hour, and I started staring at the passengers waiting to buy. Can you tell me what was ever really special about me all this time? But I believe the world is burning to the ground. Oh well, I guess we're gonna find out. Let's see how far we've come. Let's see how far we've come. Well, I believe it all is coming to an end. Oh well.
His book is at the back of the room, so if you just bring it up here, I want to show it. That way people will see it. I think it might be useful.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, I didn't realize that we had audio here. And Matthew Stein, hello, that's very nice to meet you.
Hi, it's a pleasure meeting you too.
Okay, I'm Carrie Cassidy, and this is Bill Ryan from Project Camelot.
And this is the next best thing to a hologram. We've got a holographic Matthew Stein and a holographic book, almost. A bit flat, but...
It's a bit flat, but it's very thick. It's good for weightlifting exercises, especially if you get a case of them. They're quite heavy by a case of 10.
Very good. It reminds me of an updated version of the Whole Earth catalogue, and that tells you a little bit about my generation, I guess.
Well, sort of. See, the Whole Earth catalog had a huge access to tools, and as a child I just poured over it and over it and over it. But my book is kind of like access to a much more specific set of tools, but it includes practical how-to information on a huge variety of skills that loosely compiled under the topics of self-reliance, sustainability, and surviving the long emergency, which is the subtitle of the book. And the subtitle is very accurate. It's kind of what you need to know to major meltdowns, and also about waking up to what's really going on and what it's really going to take to make a sustainable future. You know, I believe it's doable. Difficult, but doable. You know, defeating Hitler was extremely difficult, and it never would have happened if it was number 10 on the world's priority list. It had to be number 1, and it barely happened at number 1. And creating a sustainable world is a greater difficulty than defeating Hitler, but it's doable, just like defeating Hitler was doable.
I'm very impressed, Dave. Michael. Sorry, Matthew, I beg your pardon. For some reason I want to call you Dave.
Well, that's okay. Just think about Matt as in door.
Yeah, right, sure. Please forgive me that. It's because I don't know your work, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so very interested, and I'm immediately impressed by your story. And I have a little bit of the same background as you do. I'm not an engineer, but I'm a physicist. I regard myself as a practical guy. I'm what the Americans would call a backwoodsman myself. I've done my own share of skiing on Killington, and I've done a lot of mountaineering and rafting, and I've been across the desert in the Kalahari and everything else you can think of. And I regard myself as somebody who knows what to do if they get dumped in the middle of nowhere. And I have had exactly those same thoughts that, you know what, I'm not even sure if I could light a fire, let alone catch a rabbit and cook it and make my own clothes and build my own shelter and all of this other stuff if I didn't happen to have a knife in my pocket. You know, so I was inspired personally to start thinking about this by a BBC television series which you may be familiar with, and I cannot remember the title of it, but it was a brilliantly conceived reality show. And if I remember it right, this was a few years ago, they had 4 people who they put together in a survival situation. There was a physicist. It was something like this. It was a physicist, a biologist, a chemist, and some kind of technologist or an engineer or a technician guy. And they were put in the middle of nowhere, and they'd have to build a battery or a water wheel or some means of lighting.
One moment it wasn't there, and the next moment it was. And my first thought, honestly, was no effing way. I mean, I'm not. There's like, I don't know all this stuff. I can't possibly do this. And what some might refer to as the still small voice in my head assured me that nobody knew it all. And it also assured me that I had the skills and talents that, should I decide to take on this assignment, and it felt much more like my assignment than my idea, that I would receive the inner and the outer help, meaning I would receive the intuitional guidance along with the assistance of various experts and materials I dig up to put this project together. So in a nutshell, what I was shown was that if here with my mechanical engineering Bachelor of Science from MIT, if I was dropped into the middle of the Amazon basin, rainforest, without any high-tech tools, nothing at all other than the clothes on my back, I realized that I could not duplicate or replicate pretty much anything from our technological society. So, and I thought, well, here I am with a backcountry background and an engineering background from one of the best schools in the world, and I'd be stuck. And I thought, you know, if I'm stuck, then the average human being would be 100 times more stuck than me. So the book is about, on the one hand, can we change the course that we're headed on and avoid collapse and create a sustainable world and a new renaissance? And on the other hand, it's the practicalities of, hey, even if we do this right, we're going to have some major bumps in the road where things are going to fall apart to some degree, at least for a period of time, and we're going to have to fend somewhat for ourselves. So, and if we do it wrong, then our civilization will collapse, and many of the people in the world will perish. And so, and the global you know, our global economy will be poof. It'll be history. So the book is about the practicalities of coping with varying levels, everything from minor inconvenience